Good morning, or actually good afternoon for those of you who are joining from Europe. We've got our third European guest joining us today, Meta, joining us from London. We'll give her a proper introduction. This is the original Meta, by the way. We'll give her a proper introduction in a moment. First, just some administrivia. What you're going to take away today, bottom line up front, is we're going to talk a lot about the value of marketing and the tips about avoiding the temptation of cutting the short-term growth or the short-term savings for the long-term growth, which every company is facing right now. And certainly Meta's perspective over in Europe will be extremely helpful. My co-host Meg and I have been doing this for 3 years now. Meg, who formerly ran SiriusDecisions research, and I have cobbled together over 200 speakers over the last 3 years. If you click, and my camera sometimes reverses it, but if you click in the upper corner, you can like and subscribe to any of our go-to-market best practice videos. They're chock full of best practices and value that you could immediately extract answers to your questions. Of course, if you have specific questions, you could always ping either Meg or I, and we'd be happy to orient you to the right video or the right answer. But each week we start off with a poll, and this week being no different. And this week's question, we were just talking about it as we were coming onto the screen here. I thought this was a great question that Meg and Meta put together, a fantastic question around the value of C-suite. And why I thought it was so fantastic was I was very surprised, even though I put the somewhat category of how well does the C-suite understand the value of marketing. I would have expected a little bit more with all the tools and all the measurement and all the talk that we've done with alignment and the education around models. Even though it's only 18 votes, which, it's a little on the light side given LinkedIn's algorithm. But I don't know, Meg, what was your reaction when you saw this poll?
Well, I'm in the somewhat camp. And I think, the way that we define that is most of the members of the C-suite understand the traditional contribution of marketing, such as pipeline, but not its full value, which can be considerably more strategic and considerably wider than top of the funnel. And what this is a bit of a cautionary tale to say, if your answer is somewhat not at all or even reasonably well, we've got some work to do to make sure that our fellow executives, and by extension their teams, understand how best to work with marketing, what marketing can bring to the table, and how marketing can contribute to growth. Because if we don't do that, we run the risk of being perceived as, well, less than valuable and less than worthy of investment, which isn't the situation at all. So with that in mind, I am extra delighted to have Meta Karagianni joining us today. She is a former colleague of mine from our SiriusDecisions and Forrester days, but she is also an amazing marketing executive and just a true expert advisor to CMOs with a particular expertise in an area that I know many people struggle with, which is the balance between global and regional marketing and how best to optimize regional marketing as part of your portfolio. And Meta joins us from London, so we're extra lucky that she's joining us late on her Friday afternoon. So Meta, thank you so much for being here.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We are delighted. And I'm dying to know, please, what do you think of the poll answer here?
Yeah, as I look at these answers, John, I would have liked to be with you looking and wanting a little bit more at that first choice very well. And for those who said very well, that's great. But one caution from my perspective is that we cannot tick the box, right? We cannot just stop doing it, because imagine there is a new executive coming in, and then we need to kind of reinstigate those conversations about the value of marketing. And I think it is important also to notice that we put deliberately, when we created this question, the word value rather than contribution, right? Because the value could be much broader. We're not talking just about how marketing drives pipe and creates revenue, but there is a fuller aspect of how marketing delivers value to the business and drives our business objectives. Back to the results of the poll, I think if I look at the sum as reasonably well and the somewhat, there are some nuances that is important to start unpacking, I think, in our discussion. One nuance is that oftentimes I see the value of marketing being fragmented. So what I mean by that, a cohort of executives thinking about A, and someone else in another cohort thinking about B. So what we need to do there is to start unifying the value or the view of the value of marketing. Or oftentimes in the somewhat answer, there is the hidden danger that oftentimes marketing is only viewed for the revenue portion of the value, the demand gen, if you want, the pipeline creation. So again, what we need to do there is start expanding and educating the C-suite about all the ways that marketing can impact the business. Now, along with that unification and expansion, oftentimes there are obsolete views of the value of marketing, right? Give me the leads. And we all know very well that maybe it's more about the opportunities, right? How do we work together around buying groups? And we will circle back and talk a little bit about that in just a second. But if I take a step back, when I see that fragmentation of the understanding of the value, or that siloed view of the value, oftentimes what also happens is that we start closing those conversations around the value of marketing on more the tactical execution. And given the environment, the soft economy, the pressure that we all see, that means that oftentimes those conversations are around the tactical level. How do we optimize the channel, the cost per click, the CTRs? Important to have, absolutely. But I think there is an opportunity to start expanding, as I mentioned, that conversation around the value of marketing, not only on the tactical front, but also on the more strategic front. Let me use an analogy, right? If we stay on the tactical front, it's like owner of a restaurant, your CEO, comes in and asks the chef, marketing, how many eggs are you using for a particular dish? Rather than asking, what is the combination of the dishes that we're having to attract the right audience to increase, right, the success of a restaurant? So that's the analogy. I like using it that in order to say, yes, we need to optimize on the tactical level, but we absolutely need to optimize also on the audience level. And that starts to get us in a very different kind of conversation. How do we align around buying groups? How do we align around audiences, ICPs, go to market? Does that make sense, Meg and John?
It does, Meta. And I think you've brought up, I think, an area that several of our past guests have raised, which is a shift to the mindset of buying group versus individual person being our target as marketers, and indeed as an entire go-to-market team as a company. But with that in mind, it's not a small change. And one of the things I know you've advised many leaders on is how to address the cultural component of change. And what would you say, you know, in this environment of constrained resources and challenging market, when you do actually need to change the way that you're going to market, what are some of the ways that you advise marketing leaders to help with that cultural change that it will take to embrace these updated models?
Yeah, great question. So there are a couple of things that we can do. And the first one is to recognize that it's not just an operational change, right? It's a strategic and cultural change, as you mentioned. So it is important oftentimes the change cannot be only within marketing. We have to make sure that as we talk about that reorientation, we bring the other functions together. So we need to come together to define who is in the buying group, rather than just using, right, the abstract, oh, we're going after a buying group. I was working with an organization who had pivoted already to buying groups, but they haven't had that specific question, who is in the buying group, and alignment across sales, product, and marketing. And coming to the also to the part of your question, Megan, that we have limited resources, is an acknowledgement that we may not be able to go every member of the buying group. Therefore, we have to prioritize which stakeholders we are going to focus on, right? And then redefine our processes throughout our lead management to carry that multi-thread as we progress. Again, the organization that I was working with, they've done great work and within marketing, talking about buying groups. But then when they're passing the opportunity, the processes on the BDR and the sales component was not there to carry that multi-thread. There was not necessarily a fuller enablement of our teams to be able to go after the different stakeholders of the buying group, members that we want to target. So that's important, right? Unification, definition of who is in the buying group, prioritization. We don't have infinite resources. And if I go one step before that, there is the opportunity where we can drive focus and make some choices with the resources that we have in our go-to-market. When we think about which segments, verticals, size of organizations, type of organizations that we are going after. And that's also an area, going back a little bit to the conversation about global versus regional, where it is absolutely critical that we cannot think that a view of the world, maybe from a US perspective, is the same for EMEA and APAC, right? Some guardrails could be established, but then there needs to be a dialogue and an alignment. Are these the industries? Are these the type of companies that we are going to go after in our international markets?
Yeah, you bring up a really great point about the international market side of things and kind of the differences there. And obviously with your unique view of sitting over in Europe relative to maybe our North America audience, have you seen other kind of either mistakes or lessons learned when dealing with the two different continents of marketing and trying to get this alignment that you're talking about, or the definitions or the unifications? Any common issues there that you see across those kind of communication, either from a European held company perspective or a US perspective going into the other market?
Yeah, so I see issues across the board, from the strategy all the way down to the implementation. So thinking about, I already touched about the alignment on ICP and segments that we're going to go after. Alignment on the buying group and the personas that we're going to prioritize, they may be a little bit different. Whom we are selling to in the US, whom we are selling to EMEA and Asia Pacific. We may need to do some work to tweak our messaging. And then we go and we circle back to the tactical execution. What are the right combination of tactics and channels to use across different markets, right? They may not be the same as we experience as buyers and customers who are different across different markets.
Well, and Meta, that brings to mind, I think, a second component of the cultural shift in a broader understanding of marketing's impact on the business, and that is the set of objectives that it can touch on. And while I think most people would say they're familiar with marketing's role in the buying cycle, that's pretty typical, and probably have permission to talk about changes to buying groups and how we're going to engage them. What happens when the primary objective of a business in a given quarter or year is retention and expansion of existing customer relationships? How do you think marketing can expand the understanding of the C-suite on what it can do to address that particular set of objectives in the post-sale world?
Yeah. Just in the given quarter, right? The reality is that when you ask leaders, how much of your revenue will come from existing customers? I've never heard, unless it is a startup, right, in a very early stages. But typically you hear things like, well, more than 60, more than 70% will come from our existing customer base. Yet you see a misalignment of the focus, the investment, even the measurement, right, on the post-sale customer life cycle. So I think that is starting to change. More recently, we're starting to see a recognition that marketing can play a greater role there, which is good news. But again, oftentimes I see an initial focus on what I call the low-hanging fruit, right? Asking marketing to bring customer references, asking marketing to run customer events, maybe to set up communities and drive that engagement. Important, great things. They are baseline for creating value. But I think there is that expansion of where marketing can deliver value by thinking of marketing as one of the levers and part of the equation to bring the cost of serve down. What if we can have an accelerated onboarding experiences that our customer management teams, they cannot do. They do it customer by customer. That's the role, right? Whereas us at marketing, we can elevate and look at cohort of customers and run programmatically efforts throughout the entire customer lifecycle. So an example of how do we improve and make more effective our onboarding? How do we make sure that customers find the information that they need when they need it to accelerate their usage? How marketing can use our understandings, our digital signals to even predict churn. So again, I was working with a client that had that attention on retention, on predicting churn, but they were doing this only via the signals of product usage, right? They weren't bringing and combining how much these customers are engaged with our customer marketing efforts, how much they are engaged with our community. So kind of triangulate that signals to create, if you want, a customer health score and bring those dots and connect the dots together.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about retention. And I think next week we're having Rod Cherkis, he's been a guest prior. He's got a CS background. We've had a few CS folks joining us on our discussions, and there's always this hot potato question of retention. Who owns it? Is it marketing? Is it CS? What's marketing's role? And these days, I don't want to say it's so important, because I think the value is still in growth versus retention. But if you're not retaining, you can't grow. So I'm curious, do you have a point of view on the ownership and whether it's marketing, CS, combination thereof?
Yeah, great question, John. I absolutely have a point of view. And one of the things that you are seeing me hesitating a little bit is that approach of that through the lens of ownership. Who owns the customer relationship? Who owns retention? And I think if we pivot our understanding, it's not about ownership, it's about how do we work together to enable the customer to achieve outcomes that are important for the customer. And those outcomes, from a customer perspective, will change, right? At the beginning that I use and I start engaging with an organization as a maybe first-time customer to someone who is with you for 3, 4, 5 years, right? So for me, that language of ownership doesn't promote alignment, doesn't facilitate the different functions to come together and recognize that we all play a role. Customer success management plays a role in that retention game at an individual customer level. Customer marketing can come in and accelerate and benefit and drive retention forward, as I mentioned before, in a more programmatic level, right? So we need to work together. Now, another thing that I would like to a little bit bring into the discussion is maybe the word ownership and people saying, oh, I own it. Sometimes there is a confusion between ownership and accountability. Now, right, I'm not suggesting that we all work together, therefore there are no metrics or measurement and KPIs to evaluate how we are succeeding or against the objectives that we have. Absolutely. Every function will have those KPIs that ladder up, if you want, to that common objective of driving retention, customer growth, cross-selling, upselling, so on and so forth. But I think it is important to distinguish ownership and accountability.
And Meta, when you advise marketing leaders who are in a situation where, if we go back to our poll, the C-suite doesn't necessarily understand some of the ways that marketing might contribute, and doesn't necessarily see marketing as needing a seat at the strategy table. What are some of the things you would recommend that marketing executives do to change that engagement model and narrative?
Yeah, I think partially the one of the challenges that we have in communicating the value of marketing is the complexity of what we do. Right? Marketing touches so many stakeholders within the organization and outside of the organization. We touch customers, prospects, investors, AR, analysts, broader stakeholders outside, and channel partners. We also touch employees, product, solution, executives within the organization. So I think for me, there is a yin-yang, if you will, when we talk about marketing value. So there are two sides, if you want, in that equation. One is the more mechanical, which is the KPIs, the dashboarding, the business reviews, that rhythm that you spoke a little bit also in your last week's podcast. It's important to have that. In there, a couple of things that marketing leaders need to do is to establish a common taxonomy of metrics. Oftentimes, we see dashboards that are very oriented towards what we used to call activity metrics in our SiriusDecisions days, right? But there is a broader taxonomy of metrics, things of the activity, thinking of the outputs, thinking of the impact, and also thinking about readiness metrics. So bring that taxonomy of metrics and use it across the entire measurement capability. The second thing that it is important to do from a market leader's perspective is to declutter our CMO level dashboard. I think, John, you were talking again last week a little bit with your guest about a unified dashboard. So I'm calling it the CMO level dashboard, right? That dashboard oftentimes could be very demand and revenue and pipe oriented. So that's an opportunity for the marketing leader to start thinking of different sections of the dashboard that can articulate the work that we are doing for revenue creation across different go-to-market motions, for brand reputation, thought leadership, for sales enablement, for employee engagement, right? Start to bring that holistic story of marketing. So that's, if you want, the mechanical. On the non-mechanical, and this is what I call the choreography of value. We need to think about the story we want to tell when we are in front of our stakeholders. And marketing leaders, of course, we are more experienced standing in front of our stakeholders, telling that story. But it's also important to equip our teams. You know, when the field teams interact with the field sales, do they have that unified story of value to tell? Right? So how can we have that unified story and be able to arm our teams internally whenever they are in those conversations, in the water cooler, in the elevator, whatever that may be, to be able to articulate the holistic value of marketing?
You're definitely speaking my love language about dashboards and the commonality of metrics and processes and definitions. It's the only way you can scale. So I violently agree with you on that. And it's amazing how many companies really struggle with those fundamentals even today. And we, everybody's been talking about it for so long, yet it's really challenging to do, to get everybody on the same sheet of music and kind of performing in that same way. Let me ask, just keeping an eye on time here, probably be my last question, but maybe related to all the activities that you mentioned, and I don't disagree with anything that you said there. What if we put the model on its ear a little bit and think about the communication from marketing leader to marketing team? I wonder if some of the team members sometimes get myopically focused, like, hey, I've got to get this creative project done, or that's sales problem to do the conversion, or that's sales pipeline. That's not my job, kind of thing. Do you have any tips or advice in that scenario to a marketing leader of what they might be saying or bringing their team along in that journey, so they're not saying, hey, that's, I'm just focused on my task. and maybe thinking about some of the ideas that you're talking about here of getting marketing perceived even more broadly at the C level.
Yeah. It's important, I think, there to do the work of connecting the activities to how they ladder up to a higher order goal. So example could be, you are in product marketing, you need to drive messaging and build personas, but that enables the marketing organization to run campaigns and programs, drive the sales enablement, make those connections. Oftentimes, to your point, John, someone who sits in a particular function and is tasked to do their job, they're looking at their job through that lens. So it is kind of our responsibility as marketing leaders to help them think how their job contributes to higher level, I call it higher level efforts, and ultimately to the business objectives of the organization and the cross-functional work that others need to do, right? The personas that we're building enable sales. We shouldn't lose sight of that, right? Or enable SDRs and so on and so forth.
All right, we're both entering our tips in. There's a lot of great stuff in there, Meta, and I think your point is a really good one. I think especially for people who are newer to marketing functions, I know many of us have the opportunity to help develop early career professionals. And one of the main things that I find folks really crave is that connection to understanding how what they're spending their time doing links up to the things that are important to the business and the things that are important to customers. And there always is that connection. But we do sometimes need to help them make it and understand.
And a great, sorry, Megan, to jump in, and a great mechanism there is the starting point of the marketing planning and the plan for the year, where you're starting to educate your teams. This is what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. And by the way, this is what we are not going to do. This is no longer important, right? So having that discipline of being able to not just do a plan and repeat activities because we've done them last year, it's also another great way of kind of bringing the team together and giving clear guardrails of what we need to do and how we all work together towards the business objectives for the year.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. A good plan goes a long way to a better outcome. John, any last questions for Meta? I know we're coming up on time.
Meta, thank you for investing your time afternoon with us. It's been a great conversation. And no, I've got nothing else, Meg, unless you have anything on your side.
Nope, just dropping in Meta's LinkedIn page. So if you'd like to reach out to her, you can go ahead and do so. And I'll also put in her email. Meta, thank you so much for joining us today. You always have amazing insights and really, really useful information for all of us. And we're very grateful that you joined us today.
It's my pleasure. I really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And next week, we've got, on the heels of a great speaker from Europe, we go back to the US, and we'll be talking with Rod Charkis on his new book, Reach. And he just came back from Gainsight's annual meeting, I think in St. Louis here this week. So it'll be really interesting to hear his perspective of what went on there. He was a chief customer officer of Gainsight at one point in time. And of course, his new book as well, we'll be talking about that. So with that, I will put Meta's email address here and her LinkedIn, and we will wish you a great week, and we'll see you same time next week.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and happy